In today's video, I am going to be predicting the AFC West. Subscribe and like the video if you do going to enjoy. Let's hop into it. So in this video, I'm going to begin by talking about each individual team within the AFC West, and then I'll be predicting who is going to win the AFC West and in what particular order. With that said, we're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top, beginning with the Las Vegas Raiders, who ended last year with a 4-13 record. Now, despite the 4-13 record, this team is actually not too far away from actually kind of being competitive. This was a 4-win team that frankly probably underperformed in a lot of major ways, and probably the biggest reason why was just some of the general lack of explosivity on the offense. You had Brock Bowers, you had Jacoby Myers, but you had no resemblance of a ground game. The offensive line kind of struggled, and your quarterback play for most of the year was not up to par. So what did they do in this offseason? Well, they got a brand new quarterback who is a little bit on the older side, but you know what you're going to get from Geno Smith. And you took the best running back in last year's class, and frankly, probably one of the best running back prospects we've seen in quite some time. I'm not going to say he's better than like a Bijan or a Saquon, but he's on par with those guys in Ashton Jeanty, who's going to be your number one running back, your 3-down guy. And I just love his fit for this particular team. You go out there, you take a Dante Thorne, a Jack Besh. You already still have Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers there. Offensive line is still a little bit questionable, but you basically overhauled this entire offense, and now this offense looks like it can be a pretty competitive unit. Now, on the defensive side of things, last year, this team was all right at times, but there was also some really bad moments here and there. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I do not necessarily think this defense is going to be, honestly, that much better. If not, it arguably could be even worse than last year. You lose your linebacker. Christian Wilkins obviously just got released, which that's a whole story in and out of itself. Whether you agree or disagree, he is a talented player that is no longer on the roster. They did not seriously address the secondary in like a massive way. So for the most part, gotta be honest with you, I do think the defense might be a little bit of a weak spot. But it's not necessarily to say that there's not bright spots on this defense. Max Crosby is one of those dudes. He's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. You pair him up there with the Malcolm Kuntz, and, you know, we'll see what happens with Tyree Wilson. Wilson's kind of in a make-or-break year, so hopefully he has a big-time year. Jermaine Pratt, a Landon Roberts, they'll get the job done. I don't think they're as good as a Robert Spillane, which I thought was a pretty big loss, but I think they can get the job done. Secondary-wise, Darian Porter, I think, could play a big-time role this upcoming year. Jeremy Chin will step into a big-time role this year. Eric Stokes, Darnay Holmes, Richardson, Bennett. We'll see what all those guys can do. I think the secondary could definitely use some improvement. All in all, this is going to be a Raiders team that takes a big step forward. New head coach, who's, I think, one of the older coaches in the league still, but really a great offensive and just a great play caller in general, just a great coach in general, with a veteran quarterback who's gotten the job done in many years now. Some great pieces to work with on the offense, and a defense that I think isn't great, but can be functional. This team will be very competitive next year. I think they have a really solid chance of being a much improved team, potentially even coming close to doubling, if not more wins than doubling from last year. Let's move on to the team that finished third in the Denver Broncos. Now, if you've been keeping a tab on my channel throughout the offseason, and if you've seen any of the videos that involve the Denver Broncos, you guys would know that I've been a pretty big fan of what the Broncos have been building, and I truly do believe the Broncos are actually a legit contender this upcoming year. So with that said, let me just kind of explain why I love this team so much. My favorite thing about this team, you went into the offseason kind of all consensus-wise thinking this team is going to directly affect their offense. They're going to add, 2 receivers. They're going to add a new running back. They're probably going to add a sweet tight end. They're going to be super aggressive in the offensive end. And, to their credit, in some ways they were aggressive on the offensive end, adding an RJ Harvey, adding a J.K. Dobbins, adding an Evan Ingram, a Pat Bryant, and so on and so forth. But that wasn't like the big highlight moves they made this offseason. The big highlight moves was them doubling down on a defense that was already like maybe top 5 last year. Adding a guy like a Dre Greenlaw, adding a Talanoa Hufanga, and then doubling down in the draft by taking Jahdae Barron, to me, is kind of a lost art in today's game of doubling down, even though you don't necessarily need it. The Eagles are kind of an example of a team that they didn't really need defensive line when they took Jalen Carter or Nolan Smith. They didn't really need it that badly, but they're sure as hell happy now to have those guys. And for a team like Denver that really did not have any like glaring holes entering into the offseason, they had some issues, but they didn't have glaring needs. They said, okay, we have all this money because we have a rookie quarterback. Let's go out there and be aggressive by adding these difference makers defensively, who, by the way, let's hope they stay healthy. But I look at this defense. If you've watched my videos, you would know that they're my top ranked defense in the entire NFL heading into next year. They have like legitimately 4 to 5 pass rushers that can all get to the quarterback. I think they have some solid linebackers that can get downhill and run support. One of their weaknesses last year was outside of Pat Surtain, their secondary could be kind of picked on. Jaquan McMillan did not have a great year last year. Moss had a fine year, but definitely, you could see some improvements there. So they said, screw it, let's go take Talanoa Hufanga, who can be a dude that can also get downhill and run support, but can also create turnovers. And Jahdae Barron, who to me, after all the kind of that Will Johnson drama was happening with the injuries and, the speed and stuff, once that was kind of going on, Jahdae Barron to me was pretty clearly the best available cornerback in round 1. And you got the dude in the 20s. So I'm in love with this defense. And then when you look on the offensive end, I think they have one of, if not, I guess you could argue maybe the best offensive lines in the entire NFL. Pair that up now with a quarterback entering year 2, who's, from what I've heard, had a really solid camp so far, had a great rookie season. Sean Payton's an excellent offensive mind too. You pair that up with an RJ Harvey, who can be a bit of a speedster, a J.K. Dobbins, who I think pairs nicely next to him. Cortland Sutton just got paid. He's going to play an even bigger role this upcoming year now that he's fully healthy. Devon Vele steps into a bigger role. Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, etc., etc. There's some things to work with here. And Evan Ingram also gives them, some more juice in the tight end room too. So I love what this team has done. They doubled down on defense. I think they have a top 3 defense, if not the best defense in the NFL. And I think offensively speaking, they're right on the edge of maybe being a top 10 offense. And with the number 1 defense and a somewhere between 8th to 12th ranked offense, that's good enough to be a serious contender in today's NFL. Let's go ahead and move over to the team that finished in 2nd place in 2024, the LA Chargers. And similar to the Denver Broncos, I actually have quite liked what the Chargers did this offseason. Now, I did not like it as much. I thought they maybe should have been a tad bit more aggressive this offseason because they had the money, but they were not terribly aggressive. But I still think for the most part, they got the job done in a lot of different ways. And I'm really excited for this team heading into 2025. Let's start off with the offensive end. Obviously, Justin Herbert returns at quarterback. He's one of those dudes, probably a top 8 quarterback in the league. He does get some disrespect, in terms of rankings, and I think in some ways it's kind of deserved. There's guys who want to put him in top 5 conversations. I think that's a little bit, risky. He hasn't had the playoff success that you want to get, so I think he can now really, kind of put those conversations aside this upcoming season if he has a good year. You pair up Justin Herbert with 2 really nice running backs that honestly are like perfect fits within the Harbaugh system. Najee Harris, who let's hope he's okay with his eye, but he fits nicely as sort of that downhill thumper who can, create some chunk plays just off of, running dudes over. And then Amarian Hampton's also a big physical downhill runner, but he has the speed. He also has the youth, which Najee doesn't have at this stage. So pair those 2 together, Amarian probably takes the RB1 role next year and in years beyond. This year, though, he'll probably be splitting reps with Najee. So I like this running back room quite a bit. In the receiving core, I do think it is a little bit thin, but the starting 3 receivers, I think, really perfectly complement each other's skills. Now, that's not to say that I think any of these guys outside of Ladd are like true difference makers, like true go-to guys, but I think they all kind of, fit a specific role. Ladd being a bit more of the slot guy who can work in the underneath, can, find space and sit in it for Herbert, can work in the intermediate. Occasionally will get deep here and there, but primarily it's just going to be a dude who moves the chains. Quentin Johnson could be a bit more of like a weapon, use him in the backfield, find some ways to get him open downfield, scheme him up in some certain ways. He could be in for a nice year because of a Ladd. And then also Trey Harris, who is your downhill, I'm going to win 50-50 ball winner. My speed is ridiculous. I can win in a variety of different ways downhill. I can win 50-50 balls. None of these guys have like similar skill sets. Like Trey Harris is a big downhill threat. Quentin Johnson can be a downfield threat too, but is primarily more of just a weapon. You want to give him the ball in space and let him use those long ass legs to create chunk plays. And then McConkey, again, he can work downfield a little bit, but you really want him to be a chains mover, a guy who just finds space, sits in it, creates separation through route running. And I think they all kind of complement each other in some ways. You pair that with a tight end room that I'm not like in love with, but Will Dissly, Tyler Conklin, we'll see what Rondé Gadsden can do too. I've heard some good things from him. So decent tight end room and an offensive line that I think has gotten better this offseason. Joe Alt has looked really good. Rashawn Slater's there. Mekhi Becton's now at guard. I think they're probably going to end up moving Zion over to center, but we'll have to wait and see. And then Bozeman is there too. So I like the offensive line. That could be a very fun unit. And defensively speaking, look, this defense was really, really good last year. I'm not sure if I quite expected to be as good. I kind of, in some ways, think they overperformed in a couple different games, but sometimes it's a fluke, sometimes it's not, and maybe for this Chargers team, it's not. I love their like super underrated young talent that nobody talks about. Dion Henley, TikTok god, by the way, he's so funny. Tuli Tuipulotu is just one of those dudes off the edge that can get to the quarterback. Tarheeb Steele had a good year last year. You also have some other young guys too, like a Cam Hart, a Junior Colson, Deshaun Hand. There's a lot of different younger pieces here on this defense. And there's also a good mix of some vets too that can still perform at a high level. A Dante Jackson, a Khalil Mack, so on and so forth, Tyre Tart. So I like this defense. It'll be really good. Should be a top 10 unit. Great defensive coordinator. And as I mentioned with the Broncos, I look at this Chargers team and say they could have a top 10 offense, and they could probably have a top 10 defense too. So there's a very, very good chance that the Chargers make the playoffs and, who knows, run the table perhaps. But let's talk about the team that lost in the Super Bowl, but they did still finish first place in the AFC West. It is, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, I'm going to be a little bit more pessimistic with this Chiefs team for this upcoming year, but I do want to kind of install this into your mind. I still do believe the Chiefs are probably the best team in the division. So even though I might talk a little bit more negative about some of their issues and holes, I still want you to remember that the Chiefs are probably still the best team in this division, and we'll kind of get back to that here towards the back end. But for now, I just want to briefly talk about some of the flaws of this team, because it's probably a bit more fun to talk about flaws with the Kansas City Chiefs more so than all the great things that go on there. Obviously, Mahomes at quarterback. I really do worry about this running back room. Pacheco did not look good last year. We'll see if he can return to form. Kareem Hunt, Brashard Smith could be a really nice pickup for them, by the way, but he's a late round pick, so I don't want to put too much faith into that one. Pacheco really worries me. That injury was not good last year, and when he came back, he just did not look like the same guy. In the receiving core, this was my complaint last year, and it wasn't like a huge issue last year, but I think it could very well end up being, one of those problems. They got three dudes that are all kind of similar in some ways. They're not big. They're not downhill winners, or downfield winners, I should say. They're not physical 50-50 ball winners either. Hollywood can get downfield a little bit, but his explosiveness is just not what it used to be, and he could not stay healthy to save his life last year. Rice might be suspended. He might not. I think he's probably your best receiver, but he is coming off a major knee injury, and even though I think he should be fine, it is a little bit concerning. He can win in a variety of ways. When he was out last year, this Chiefs offense really missed him, and frankly, I'm not going to say they would have won the Super Bowl with Rashee Rice, but I think they might have stood a better chance, because without Rice, they just had nothing going for them. Xavier Worthy, he's a bit more of a threat. He's a bit more of a weapon, more so than like a traditional receiver. He can win downfield. He's not going to win many 50-50 balls, though. He's going to win based off speed and athleticism. You can use him in the punt game, too. So I just worry a tad bit about this receiving core, because there's just not a ton of variety. Like I talked about the Chargers, and they have three guys that do three different things. You look at the Broncos, you got multiple dudes that do different things. Even the Raiders have that sort of style, too. This Chiefs team, doesn't have that. Now, it hasn't kicked them in the butt the past couple years, but I think if there was ever a time that it could end up hurting them, I think it could be this year. And that's because Travis Kelce's probably, this is probably his last year, or second to last year. I mean, he is no longer the consistent threat that he used to be. He can still find space. He's still, athletic enough. He's still crafty, has a great connection with Mahomes. He'll have a good year, but he isn't the difference maker that he once was. And when Kelce was that difference maker, it made up for a lot of the flaws of the receiving core. But with these flaws in the receiving core and a Kelce that isn't, special anymore, I do worry a tad bit about this passing game. And if you do not get good running game either from Pacheco, Hunt, or Smith, and you pair that with the receiving core that I think will be fine, but maybe isn't that great, then you look at the offensive line, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. I kind of worry about this offense a little bit. Specifically, let's look at the offensive line. Josh Simmons at left tackle. If he's healthy, and so far it's all sounding good, then maybe he could be good, but you lose a all-pro, Pro Bowl guy in Joe Thuney. Your right tackle, Jawan Taylor, is still really bad. I mean, struggles with penalties over and over again. Trey Smith, Creed Humphrey, that's damn good. I worry about this offensive line. Right? It was bad last year, especially in the playoffs, especially against the Eagles. And a lot of those teams in the AFC, they doubled down on defensive line. They doubled down on getting as many pass rushers as possible. And if this offensive line struggles, I mean, I think it's a major concern for this team. I understand that they doubled down at left tackle by taking Simmons and Jalen Moore, but I think those are two guys with a lot of question marks they have to answer. You know, Mike Caliendo probably steps in at left guard. Maybe it's Kingsley. Maybe Jalen moves inside to play guard. I'm not sure, but that's a big shoe you have to fill there with Joe Thuney being gone. So, and then Jawan Taylor's just not been very good. So I really worry about this offensive line in a lot of ways. Now, defensively, I don't have too many, honestly, concerns. You know, their secondary, even though they don't really have big name dudes, they just consistently get the job done. I do think the Justin Reed loss could hurt them, but I'm not overly concerned about it. I think maybe they're lacking like a variety of pass rushers. Like, you know, they did add Ashton, and, you know, you also added Omar Norman Lott, but I still think it's missing like there are some teams with 2 to 3 waves of pass rushers. I kind of think right now they can go and be effective about 2 deep, which is fine, but it could be improved upon. So that's kind of it for my issues. Now, I do want to kind of counter those issues by saying this. I think they have the best play caller in the NFL with the most clutch quarterback in the NFL. And when you pair those two together with a connection like Mahomes and Kelsey, you could typically overcome a lot of the issues you might have on the roster. So even though the offensive line might be a bit concerning, I'm sure Mahomes is quite aware of this and is probably just working on the quick game with Rice, with Worthy, with Brown, with, you know, Juju, with Kelsey. And so I'm sure they're going to have counters to this. And because they did not seriously address running back in the draft, I have to think Pacheco could be totally fine. So those are some counters to some of the earlier statements I made. Let's now go ahead and talk about my predictions. Now we're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top. And for each, you know, selection, I'll kind of give you an explanation as to why. Moving to number 4, fourth place in the division, I think will be the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, I do think the Raiders will take a big step forward. I think they could maybe even be pushing for a playoff spot late in the season, but I think they're probably another year or so away from being actual playoff contenders. I love what they have on the offensive end. I think Geno can get the job done. Genty, Brock Bowers, that's going to be a nasty duo for many years to come. And I like Jacoby Myers too, as well as Jack Besh as well. But I really worry about that defense, primarily within the secondary. And outside of Max Crosby, I don't really trust some of these other defensive linemen to take a big step forward. Kuntz because of injuries. And then, of course, Tyree Wilson just hasn't done enough to really prove to me anything. So I think they'll be good, and I think they'll be a competitive team. But I think they're probably another year or so away of accumulating talent before we can talk about them being playoff contenders. In terms of wins, I think they'll get somewhere between 7 to 9 wins. I think 8 is kind of that sweet spot for me. In at third place, I'm going to go with the LA Chargers. Now, it is super tight between the Chargers, Broncos, and frankly, even the Chiefs in this conversation. I think all 3 of those teams could be in any order, and I would not be surprised. And I also want to say this. I do think 3 teams in the AFC West have a very good shot at making the playoffs. And in this specific predictions video, I think all 3 of the teams I'm going to talk about are going to end up making the playoffs. With that said, I think the Chargers will be the 3rd team here, but they will be in the wild card, probably as a 6th or a 7th seed. And my personal thought process on them is I love their roster. I think Denver's a little bit more talented defensively. I think they have equal defensive coordinators too. And offensively, I think both are pretty equal in a lot of ways too. So I'm going to give the slight edge here to Denver. It could be like a 1-game difference or some sort of weird tiebreaker that, you know, ends up being the difference as to why one gets the 2 and the 3, or maybe the 1. For sake of argument though, I like this Chargers team. I think they'll be in the playoffs. And once you get to the playoffs, anything can happen. I have them winning somewhere between 11 to 12 games in 2025. In number 2, I kind of spoiled it a little bit there. I do have the Denver Broncos. The Broncos are building something special. I love what they have on the defense. And I think offensively speaking, they should be good enough to get the job done. And they might even be better than good enough. They might be really good next year. And if they're really good, they could be pushing for the 1 seed. But I'm not going to go too far there quite yet. I still love what they have. I think they're going to finish somewhere between 11 to 13 wins, just maybe a bit more potential than the Chargers, hence why they're above them. I do think 12 wins is probably the mark they're going to get though. And in first place, yet again, I do have the Kansas City Chiefs. I know I kind of trashed their roster there for a little bit, but I think those counters are my primary reason as to why I think the Chiefs will ultimately win the division. There is not another quarterback out there that I trust more in the 4th quarter in a tight game to go out there and win the game. So even though I do think they have some flaws, And by the way, I don't think they're going to win the title this year, but I still think they're a damn good team that nobody wants to face in the playoffs, because if the score is 28-24 and the Chiefs got the ball with 2 minutes down by 4, the Chiefs are going to find a way to win that game. That's just how the Chiefs do things. So, I think that there will be in enough of those situations and they're going to win enough of those games, but I would not be terribly surprised if this was the year the Chiefs, fall down the ladder here a little bit and a team like Denver or LA wins the division. Now, I'm not predicting that because I do trust Andy Reid, I trust Mahomes, I trust Kelsey, and I trust this damn good defense. But again, I just want to throw it out there in the universe. I think it's possible this year. So with that said, my predictions for this division is the Chiefs at number 1, the Broncos in number 2, the Chargers in number 3, and at number 4, the Las Vegas Raiders. My last little thoughts before we get out. This division will be really good in 2025, but I think in 2026 and 2027, this division is completely up for grabs. This is a relatively young division with a lot of good, talented pieces. And I gotta say this, and this is, again, for Chiefs fans out there that are a little frustrated with what I've said, I have you winning the division, so chill out. I do kind of think the Chiefs' future is a little bit up in the air right now, with Reid potentially retiring soon, Kelsey probably out the door after this year, some of the defensive personnel being a little bit older and maybe, contracts step in the way here. I think there's a chance the Chiefs, may end up kind of falling back a little bit. Not saying they'll miss the playoffs every year, but I think it'll be a bit more of an up for grab division here within the next couple years. So this division is going to get so much more fun than it has been in recent years. But you let me know in the comment section below who wins the division in 2025 and who do you think wins the division next year? Let me know down below. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.